There he is, the man, the myth, the legend that is Luke. How you doing, baby? Feeling
I'm
good?
doing great, Big O. How are you, brother?
Good, man. Can't complain. We normally do it through phones, but now, now we get to do video and audio and all that good stuff. So world has changed, and I appreciate you taking some time to talk a little draft. Let's get into it with the Dolphins, man. They pick at 20. Well, you know what? Before the Dolphins, I want to get your feel on the whole quarterback thing, because everybody's got different opinions on everything going on. And, I'm more of a Drake May guy as my number 2, not Daniels, but a lot of people like Daniels. Some people don't think that J.J. McCarthy should be taken so high, or Michael Penix or that kind of stuff. So talk to me, first of all. Miami has nothing to do with quarterbacks or anything like that. But just because quarterback is such a hot topic, how are you viewing the talk of how many quarterbacks? Because in a way, it does affect Miami, because they're rooting for
as many as possible. Yeah.
To be taken before 21. So, Luke, walk me through the way you're seeing the quarterback stuff, first of all.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Caleb Williams at 1. I think at 2, you could have a fun conversation about Daniels or May, and I'm fine with either of them, depending on your team, depending on the fit, and again, what happens behind the scenes, how comfortable you feel with the player and the person. If either of those guys go ahead of the other, I don't really see a problem with that. I think those 3 guys.
I define what you're saying. If your offense needs more of a pocket guy, you're going to go May. If
Probably.
You're going to be running more what's it called,
RPOs and stuff.
Yeah, exactly, RPOs and boots and waggles and all that, then you're going to go with Daniels instead. Is that kind of what you're looking it at?
I think to a certain extent, but what I don't want to do is undersell the pocket passing ability of Daniels or the athleticism of Drake May, because I think it's too easy to get in this like, oh, Jaden Daniels is really fast, so he's a running quarterback who can kind of throw. And Drake May is, the prototypical, can stand in the pocket and deliver the ball, and maybe every now and then he'll escape for a few yards. And the film can say that to a little, to some extent, but really, if you dive deep into it, the reason that Jaden Daniels is even in this conversation at all is because of the growth he made as a pocket passer last season. Because he went from a guy who was just really fast and could run a lot of the time, and every now and then he could throw a good pass at Arizona State, to a complete player last year. He threw the ball as well as anybody from the pocket last year. He's making full field reads. He's going from 1 to 2 to 3. All these people that say he's a one read, I don't see that. That's not what I see on film. So, and I think, again, Drake May is a better athlete than he gets credit for too. So I don't know that it's specific to, if you want a guy to run more often, take Daniels. And if you want a guy to stay in the pocket all the time, it's Drake May. I don't think it's quite that simple. I think it's a lot more about getting him in the room, getting them on the whiteboard, and your scheme matching up to what he does well in terms of processing, in terms of the plays he likes to run. And again, the human being as he fits in your locker room and all that. That's the stuff that I think will matter more than athleticism versus pocket passing, if that makes sense.
Okay. So how many do you expect to go in the first round?
I think all 6 of those top guys end up in the first round. It's just too important. And again, not all of them are going to pan out. History tells us that, right? But the way it's going to go, I think the top 3 guys go top 3 that we just mentioned. McCarthy is kind of the wild card, right? So in terms of the way I rank these guys, which is completely different, obviously, than the way it'll happen on draft day for these teams, but all 3 of those top 3 guys that we mentioned are in my top 10 overall players, right? So they're top 10 players, and I expect them to go 1, 2, 3. The next quarterback on my board is Michael Penix Jr. at 28.
Okay.
So he's a high second-round grade for me at number 28 overall. McCarthy is at 30. So those 2 guys are barely outside the first-round grades for me. I understand why they'll go in the first round, but then after those guys, Bo Nix and Spencer Rattler are like right next to each other in the 60s. So like down towards the bottom of the second round. So that just gives you an idea of how I view the quarterbacks. I expect J.J. McCarthy to be a top 10 pick anyway. I think that Bo Nix would be a really great fit in Denver, especially if they move back from 12. I think Michael Penix Jr. in Vegas would make a ton of sense, not necessarily at 13, maybe, but I think they could go tackle there and then maybe try to trade back into the late part of the first round to get Penix there. But I think when all is said and done, I think those 6 guys all come off the board in the first round somewhere.
Luke, is there a sleeper quarterback then, a second, third, late second, third day guy that you think like, you know what, this guy aren't you know, a lot of people aren't talking about him. He's raw as hell, but maybe is there somebody out there you kind of like?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned Spencer Rattler earlier. I think he might go a little higher than people think just because I think all the physical tools are there. And I think mentally he's a much tougher player now than the guy we saw in the Netflix documentaries when he was a kid, right? I think he came out, and he'll be the first one to admit this. He was cocky, he was brash, and then he got humbled real quick at Oklahoma, right? He came out, he was #1 overall pick as a freshman, right? We were like, oh, he's the guy. And Caleb Williams says, not so fast, my friend. And he ends up being humbled and going to South Carolina, having to transfer and having to work his way back up again. And he still played some damn good football at South Carolina. And so I think he's kind of been the lost guy. I don't really see a huge gap between a guy like Bo Nix and a guy like Spencer Rattler. I'd love to see Spencer Rattler land in like with the Rams, where he could sit behind, you know, Matt Stafford and then work with that Sean McVay offense. Right. I think he would be a fantastic fit there. But the other guys I'll mention, I think Michael Pratt from Tulane is a mid-round guy that I think teams will really, really like. Doesn't have the high-end physical traits, but I think mentally in terms of his processing and accuracy and efficiency, I think he'd be a good fit somewhere as a future starter. The two guys that I'm keeping my eye on in terms of developmental quarterbacks, guys maybe day 3 where you're taking a flyer, Joe Milton III out of Tennessee, huge, great athlete, probably the best pure arm strength in the entire draft. Just doesn't really know what to do with it yet and needs to figure that part out. So a great developmental guy. And a guy that nobody's really talking about, Davius Richard from North Carolina Central is the deep sleeper to me. He had a really unfortunate, he broke his ankle or broke his foot in like one of the All-Star games, like after the season, which was a real bummer because we didn't get to see him work out. But go back and watch the tape. Davius Richard, he's got prototypical size. He's a great athlete, great arm strength. He's another guy on day 3 that I'd feel great about spending a 5th or 6th round pick and just letting him get in the building and develop.
I say that I only ask that because that's where they could go to give competition to their backup quarterback. So that's a place where I think the Dolphins could go in the 3rd day is something like that. That's why I asked.
Everybody should. Everybody should, first of all. Take a day 3 quarterback every year.
I agree. I totally agree. I hated the rules and how they've gone to the 2-man quarterback roster. Now I think it looks like it's going back to 3.
We never would have had Tom Brady. He was a 4th-string quarterback. It never would have happened.
Dude, I grew up that most teams had 3 to 4 quarterbacks on the roster most of the time because it behooved you. It's exactly what you said. Dude, take a quarterback late every freaking year. Work on you might end up with Tom Brady.
Even if you trade him, even if you already have a starter, you develop a guy that becomes valuable and you can trade him.
I tell the story all the time. Ron Wolf in one offseason had Brett Favre, had Aaron Brooks, had Mark Brunell, and some dude named Kurt Warner. And he cut him.
Not bad.
Yeah, he cut him because he had too many quarterbacks and Kurt was still raw and he went to the Arena League and then he went to the Rams and the rest is history. But then he goes and trades Brunell to Jacksonville. He trades Aaron Brooks to New Orleans and he fucking drafts Hasselbeck.
Always. What could you get on day 3 that's more valuable than a potential starting quarterback?
And then he trades Hasselbeck.
Yep. Just keep doing it.
And then he leaves, and then Thompson comes in. He drafts Aaron Rodgers, and the rest is history. And you know, they've been so forward thinking on this with the whole Jordan Love thing. They get it in Green Bay for many, many years, and it started with Ron Wolf. And I have no idea if you're watching that man do that. How does everybody not say, yeah, that's how you do it.
Right.
We need to do it that way. You know what I'm saying?
I agree, man.
Every year you should be drafting a 3rd-day quarterback unless your guy in the back is so good that you're like, no, well, you know, we gotta trade this guy first before we draft another guy.
Right.
It's crazy. All right. So I've talked about this with many other guys, and I'll do the same thing with you. It's kind of a perfect storm. You never want to draft for need. But the Dolphins at 21 happen to be in a position where there's going to funnel linemen that are O linemen or D linemen, either a defensive tackle where you lost Wilkins or a pass rusher where you kind of need until you get Chubb and Phillips completely back.
Right.
You know, you did sign Shaq Barrett, and that's going to help a little bit, but you probably need to draft another guy somewhere. So, Luke, tell me a little bit about what you see at 21 for Miami. First of all, at offensive line, what's realistic for them at 21?
Yeah, I mean, you never want to reach for need, but you would really like the board to fall to where your needs, you know, meet the value, right? That's what the dream is on, especially in the early rounds. But no, I think they're in a great spot. I think, like you mentioned, offensive line. We'll start with offensive line, like you said, and whether they want, you know, a tackle to give them kind of long-term insurance behind Teron Armstead, who again is getting a bit older and he's struggled with injury. So you want to have a long-term solution at left tackle. You don't really want to miss out on anything there. Whether they need an interior guy. I look at a guy like Graham Barton out of Duke, who I'm sure Dolphins fans are very familiar with at this point, can play all 5 positions. He played left tackle, he can play center, he can play guard. So he's a guy that you can just kind of plug in anywhere. And I think he'll be on the board in that range. I think Pittsburgh could take him at 20. I think he'd fit there as well because they have similar needs across the offensive line. But if he's there, I think Miami should think long and hard about that. And then after that, there's a lot of right tackles that'll be available in that range. So it would be about whether or not they feel comfortable with whoever that is, whether it's J.C. Latham from Alabama or Tyler Guyton from Oklahoma or Talise Fuaga from Oregon State. I think he'll be gone. But Amarius Mims from Georgia. Amarius Mims, I think, is the most interesting one because he played right tackle at Georgia, but he played very little. I mean, he was a first-year starter last year and missed half the season with an ankle injury. But he's just massive and athletic and long. And so you've got all the physical tools are there. So with him, I think he's the guy at 21 where I would say, hey, that's a perfect guy to bring in, sit him behind Teron Armstead for a year, let him develop and learn how to play left tackle if that's what we need. And then we insert him into the starting lineup after a year.
Although I keep injecting this, I think Austin Jackson is your left tackle.
And again, if that's the case, that's where interior –
right. Yeah. The young guy plays guard this year. And then next year when Teron leaves, you move Austin Jackson over because he's super athletic. Right. And his confidence now is soaring because he now has the coaching. And I think he can play left tackle. I really do now. Even though it didn't go well for him early, but that's because he didn't have the foundation. He wasn't physically there.
It shouldn't go well for anybody early, really. That's a hard position to play.
That is very true. But he can do it. Hell, dude, he was pulling 30, 40 yards downfield last year. I mean, this guy's athletic as hell. And then what you do with the youngin that you draft, he plays guard this year for now because you kind of need the help there. Yeah. And then next year when Teron leaves, you pop Jackson to the left, and the young kid in his second year goes to right tackle.
In that scenario, I would love to see J.C. Latham there because he is huge, and I think he would play guard really, really well right away. And then he could bounce right to right tackle, which is where he's been at Alabama, and that would be pretty seamless. So I think in that scenario, he would probably be the best fit, and I think it's possible that he gets there. Obviously, you want as many quarterbacks, as many receivers and stuff to go ahead of them to push those tackles down the board, but I think that would be a great fit in your scenario.
Yeah, I think so. All right, now I'm pass rusher. Dude, I love Jared Verse. Unless, we can sneak a crack pipe in front of him like they did with the offensive lineman, then maybe he'll fall to 21.
No gas mask situation for Jared Verse, hopefully.
You tell me, because some people think Verse will be there at 21. I don't, so I'm kind of leaning more. I love Latu. But you tell me, what do you like, Luke, at 21? What do you think fits what the Dolphins do, and what do you think is a good pick realistically at 21 on the pass rushing side?
Yeah, I think Dallas Turner, Latu, and Verse are all gone. I just don't see it. Really? Even Latu, I know he's an older player. He's 23, 24. I know he's got the injury history, from earlier in his career at Washington, but he's been able to stay healthy, and he is the best pure pass rusher in this draft off the edge in terms of technique, in terms of effectiveness and preparation mentally and physically. Like, he is a complete player, and he knows what he's doing. Like, he's not coming in with that raw rookie, I have all these physical traits, I just don't know how to use them. That's not Latu at all. He knows what he's doing. And I don't see a guy like that staying on the board that long. I can't see him getting past so many teams in the teens who need that type of player. And Verse very similarly, right, where he's just so polished, such a complete player against the run. He can rush with power. He can rush with speed. He's got production. So did Latu. those three guys, and again, Dallas Turner with his athleticism and upside, I think he's long gone too. So I think at 21, you're talking about Chop Robinson from Penn State.
Okay. Good player.
And that becomes way more of a projection, right? Because you're talking about elite athlete, elite explosiveness, but just very little production and very little finishing, right? Very little translating that athletic ability into actual production and actual finishing a sack and seeing that produce. So it's just so much more of a projection with him. Obviously, the upside is there. There's a ton of upside with those kind of physical abilities. But
the only thing I like Chop Robinson, I like his potential, but in the Dolphins scenario,
that's right.
It doesn't make sense. You need Latu or Verse more because they will transition faster, and you actually need a transitioning player at the pass rushing position a lot faster because of Phillips and Chubb's situation. You need somebody. You cannot have more of a – that's why Chop, while I like him, I don't think it fits what the Dolphins will do because he's more of a project for a year or two, and you don't have time for that right now. Your window's now. Chop doesn't fit your window now. That's the only thing I don't like.
And
I like
and again,
I don't like the situation.
Right. And also he's really, I think his rookie year, he's a sub package guy. I think he's a third down rusher because he's not great against the run. He's not a biggest guy in the world. And I think he's still learning how to set the edge against the run. And so again, a lot to work with there, but you're going to have to work with it. It's going to take some work and some time. And like you said, I think in Miami's scenario,
you're Kansas City. You can do that at that spot. You
or
can
your team on the other side, right, where you're 2 or 3 years away, and so you're planning for that anyway. You can take a guy like that. But yeah, I think for Miami, and again, that I think will lead us to the interior, right? If they're going to go defensive front, that's where I think it makes the most sense because I think Byron Murphy's probably off the board by then.
Okay,
but I think it becomes Johnny Newton from Illinois, who, to me, he is a top 10 player in this draft overall. I think he is one of the best. I think he might actually be the top defensive player on my board, period. And so the big question with him is the Jones fracture, right? He's got a foot injury. He had surgery. Is he going to come back from that? How easy is it to re-aggravate that injury? I know there's going to be some concern there. Maybe he's a little undersized, but man, when you turn on the tape, you want to see a game record. You want to see the guy that if I had to replace Christian Wilkins, I would look at that guy's tape and say, that's the guy. He can do that. That's what Newton did at Illinois. And I think if he was there at 21, that would be an easy pick for me if I'm Miami, because I just think it fills their biggest immediate need on defense, and I think the value is great.
I think Newton actually has better pass rushing skills than Wilkins.
I
think Wilkins might be the better run stuffer.
Mm-hmm. Well, he's bigger. He's got the bigger frame, so that helps. But yeah, I agree with you, man. Newton is such a polished pass rusher, man, and he's nasty. He's a violent dude. Like he's the type of guy that nobody wants to line up against. It's just it's going to be a long day, and that's the kind of guys you want on your side.
Okay, second round now, or where they're at. Again, it kind of
it's the inverse, right? Whatever they don't get in the first round.
Yeah, because and this is kind of why I like the linemen. I think, unless Verse or Latu fall to you at 21, which I freaking love those guys. But if you do get a lineman, I've noticed that the defensive tackles in that part of the draft might actually, you might have an option there.
Yep.
Also a defensive tackle. So talk to me either about defensive tackle, pass rusher, linebacker, offensive lineman. I think those are areas where you might be able to fill at that spot.
Yeah, I think so too. I think particularly along the defensive line, if they don't go Newton at 21, maybe they go offensive line. I like Chris Jenkins out of Michigan. Obviously, his dad was a very good player for Carolina for a long, long time as defensive tackle. Oh yeah, that's right, he did. Yeah, so that you could bring that home with Chris Jenkins. I love him. Braden Fisk, if he's still on the board, I don't know that he'll make it that far out of Florida State. He's a guy that honestly I think compares very well to Christian Wilkins. Very similar frame, similar athletes. Had great production at Florida State. I think those two guys I would love to see. Michael Hall Jr., if they're okay with a little bit more of an undersized guy at defensive tackle out of Ohio State. I like him a lot. In terms of edge rushers, Chris Braswell out of Alabama, Adisa Isaac out of Penn State. Are two guys that I think on the back half of the second round would make a lot of sense to them. Linebacker is going to be, I think, a sweet spot there in the mid to late second round. I don't think we'll have any linebackers off the board, probably in the top 40 or so. And then you start to talk about Edgerrin Cooper from Texas A&M, who I love, Junior Colson from Michigan, who I love, Peyton Wilson from North Carolina State, if they're okay with the medicals, Jeremiah Trotter Jr. Man, there's so many. How many guys in this class do I have to say junior afterwards, and then the gray hair just continues to grow because I watched their entire father's careers? Frank Gore Jr., Marvin Harrison Jr., Jeremiah Trotter Jr., Brendan Rice, Jerry Rice's son, is in this draft.
Chris Jenkins.
It's in ridiculous. Chris Jenkins. There's so many. I can't deal with it. I can't.
Yeah, no, trust me. I'm like you, a little older, so I've seen
Look at that picture of me. It's a great reminder of how old I've gotten. Look at this.
The father, the son, and then the grandson. I'm already at the grandson part.
I can't wait for Frank Gore III here.
Yeah. So I'm already at the grandson part at times. So yeah, it's crazy. I've gone through it myself, man. All right, so Luke, we'll close it out with this. Give me a sleeper in the third day that you're thinking about, whatever it is, any position out there that you're like, this is a guy I love in the third day because of this. Who is it?
All right, so I'll give you a few because I love these questions, right? And the first pick is a homer pick because I went to the University of South Florida, and I love Donovan Jennings. He's an offensive lineman at USF. He can play guard. He can play tackle. He's a great athlete, had a phenomenal pro day down here in Tampa. And again, just an experienced guy. Again, played a ton of snaps, has a ton of starts under his belt, and can play multiple positions. I think somebody's going to be really happy on day 3 when they get Donovan Jennings. Bo Braid is a safety out of Maryland who I really, really like. I think he's a top 5 safety in this class. I think I'm in the minority when it comes to ranking him that high. But he's just a hard-hitting guy, great athlete. He can play in the box. He can play single high. He can do a lot of things. And then I look at the running back class because I think the running back class is very interesting in that there's not the top heaviness that we saw last year with Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs, the guys in the top. But I see a big group of those guys in the 3rd or 4th round. So if I see a guy like Audric Estime still on the board in the 4th round, I'd love to see him in a place where we'll take advantage of his power and his explosiveness between the tackles. A little bit of a deeper sleeper there. I like Isaiah Davis from South Dakota State, another power guy between the tackles who can also be explosive. He ran against so many closed boxes, so many loaded boxes in college, and still churned out a ton of yards. So he's a guy that I think could be a really great complementary back. If you've got kind of like a lightning guy, an explosive guy in your backfield, and you add a guy like Estime or Isaiah Davis as the power back, I think you'll be really happy on day 3.
That's interesting that you mentioned power back because that's something they drafted last year, Chris Brooks, and right. I like him a lot actually. He's got great vision, which blew me away. I was actually disappointed they didn't use him a lot because I thought they needed a little thunder because, Mostert and Achane, that's a lot of lightning.
You got all the lightning you need.
All the lightning you need. So you need some thunder. And I thought they would use Chris Brooks. So maybe they bring in somebody like that in their 3rd day picks to give Brooks a little competition because I think the power back is one area where Miami needed to improve and dedicate themselves a little bit more to the short yardage game.
Yeah, I completely agree. Again, either of those guys on day 3 would make a ton of sense. There's just that's the fun part of the draft to me. Once you get into those later rounds and you can find those gems that end up making a big impact. We've seen it with Isaiah Pacheco and Puka Nacua in recent years. You can find guys that can make an immediate impact if you know what you're looking for and how they fit with your scheme and team. That being able to find guys on day 3 that make an immediate impact tells me that a team knows exactly what their identity is, and they can identify guys that fit the culture, fit the scheme, fit the locker room, because that's how you make that impact so quickly.
Luke, if people want to keep up with you over at Athlon Sports, what do they got to do, man?
Yeah, come over to athlonsports.com. We've got I just dropped a new 4-round mock draft just this morning. So you can see that over there right now. I've got all my positional rankings up. I got my big board up. So all of the rankings, all the top 300 players in the entire draft. So we go well beyond the 250 or so that are going to actually get drafted. I've got them broken down by position as well. If you haven't already, go pick up our draft guide. I know a lot of people out there have been reading those for years. So I got to be heavily involved in making this year's magazine, which I absolutely loved. So go buy one of those. And again, come on over to Twitter, X, whatever the hell they're calling it now. And follow me at Luke Easterling. Let's talk some NFL draft.
Luke, as always, man, great stuff, my brother. Appreciate you immensely. We'll catch up down the line, my friend. Have
absolutely.
Christmas in the NFL this week.
Thanks, man. Can't wait for it, and can't wait to sleep for like a month after I'm done.
Amen. Thank you, my brother. Appreciate it.
Take care, man.
You got it. There you go. Luke Easterling, man. Athlon Sports.